What if the person you think will break you becomes the one who finally sees you? The wind cut sharp down the ridge as Mave Callahan pulled the soaked rope across her shoulder, trying once again to drag the heavy log up the muddy incline. Her boots slipped and she fell hard on her knees. The ground was freezing cold, but the ache inside her was worse. She stayed there for a moment, hands sinking into the muck, breath turning to white clouds in the air. The mountain didn't care how tired she was. It didn't care she was alone. It didn't care about the scar across her jaw or the burns still healing on her cheek. Up here, strength was the only language that mattered. She stood again, jaw tight, and tossed the rope back over her shoulder. Her coat was thin, her scarf torn, and her fingers cracked from cold. The half-finished cabin behind her looked like a skeleton of hope, walls barely chest-high, no roof, no safety, but she wasn't going to die in a tent this winter. She'd already lived through worse. She leaned forward and pulled. One step, then another. The log groaned behind her like it didn't want to be saved either. Then she heard it, a horse. Slow hoofbeats, steady and sure. Not a rush, not a threat. Someone riding with purpose. For a second, she thought it was another trick of the cold. Sometimes the snow brought memories she didn't want, but no. This sound was real. Afternoon. A voice called from the ridge. Mave didn't look up right away. She didn't wipe the dirt from her knees or the blood from her knuckles. Let him see her as she was. That's a lot of fight for one woman, the rider said. She finally looked up. A man sat on horseback, face carved by wind and time. His hair was long, with streaks of gray, tied back behind him. His skin and features looked part Cherokee, maybe more than part, hard to tell. His eyes were dark and steady like wet bark. He wore no badge, no town coat, just leather and silence. "You ain't met enough women," Mave replied. The corner of his mouth moved just slightly, not a smile, maybe something like respect. He dismounted without rushing and walked toward her with calm, even steps. Not close enough to crowd her, but not afraid of her either. That told her more than anything he could have said. "You live up here?" he asked, nodding toward the cabin frame for now. He studied the broken tent, the scattered tools, the fire pit with smoke barely rising. He didn't say the words she'd heard from others, words like foolish or reckless or desperate. He said something else instead. "You'll need bracing for the roof. Storm season's coming early. I'll manage. You have help? You see anyone else?" Quote. His gaze shifted to the log she'd been dragging. "That thing needs 2 men, or 1 damn determined woman. I qualify." He looked at her, really looked, not at her scar, not at her worn clothes, at her stance, her grit, her fight. When his eyes met hers again, she said the words before he could. "I'm not pretty." Her voice was flat, used to disappointment, used to being judged before she even opened her mouth. "That's fine," he said quietly. "I need true, not fancy. Pretty folk freeze quicker out here." For the first time all day, Mave's breath hitched, not from pain, from surprise. Most people pitied her or feared her. This man did neither. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Run cattle a few ridges south." Heard hammering. Came to look. "You always ride toward noise?" I got tired of riding away from things. There was something buried in those words, something heavy, something he didn't explain. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elias Redfern." "Mave Callahan." He nodded once, like he already knew her story even though she hadn't said a thing. "You got nails," he said, pointing toward the small pile she'd salvaged. "Enough tools to make something real." "I can trade help for supper and mending," he continued. "You cook. I survive. That'll do." She didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure she trusted him, but she also wasn't sure she trusted the loneliness that had been swallowing her whole for months. "Tomorrow," he said, turning toward his horse. "First light." He rode back into the trees without waiting for her reply. Mave sank onto a stump, hands shaking. It was the first offer she'd had that didn't feel like charity. The first time in 6 months, someone had looked at her without flinching. She didn't know which scared her more, being seen or wanting to be. That night, snow fell in small flakes, touching the ground like promises. Inside her tent, she stared at the sagging canvas above her and wondered what tomorrow would bring. For the first time in a long time, she wanted morning to come. Before dawn, she stepped outside and froze. A small piece of bark sat on her doorstep, one word carved into it. Tough. Not fancy. Not dramatic. Just truth. The firewood by her tent had been restacked too. Not out of pity. Out of respect. She didn't smile, but something warm broke through the cold inside her chest. When Elias arrived at first light, he carried a second axe and nodded as if he'd expected her to be there, coffee already simmering. "You awake early," he said. "I work early." She handed him a cup. "It's strong." "I like strong." They worked in silence. A quiet rhythm formed between them. He moved with care. She moved with stubbornness. Together they made progress. By midday, sweat steamed from their shoulders. Snow melted around their boots. The cabin walls began to take shape. "You build better than most men," Elias said. "Not sure if that's a compliment." "It is." Mave chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. They ate beside the fire, steam rising from their coffee. For a moment, the world felt almost kind. Elias studied the half-built cabin. "This'll stand," he said. "Storm or no storm." She nodded. "I taught myself." "Your husband didn't help?" "He didn't teach," she whispered. "He took." Elias didn't push, didn't pry, just listened. And for Mave, that was more dangerous than the storm coming down the mountain, because listening meant seeing. And seeing meant she wasn't invisible anymore. The storm rolled in faster than either of them expected. By late afternoon, the sky turned the color of iron, and the wind came down the ridge like a warning. Mave felt the shift in the air before she saw the clouds. She knew that kind of cold. It was the same kind that had chased her through the valley the night she ran from her old life. The same kind that didn't care who lived or died. "We need to brace the frame before it hits," she said. Elias nodded. He didn't waste time asking how she knew. He trusted the way she read the mountain, the way she listened to the land like it spoke her mother tongue. They worked fast, hands raw from cold, hammers ringing through the clearing. The walls shook with every gust, and the canvas tarp flapped like a loose sail ready to rip away. Snow stung their faces as they drove nails, lifted beams, and tied down ropes until their fingers went numb. By the time darkness settled, the half-cabin stood stronger than it had that morning, still open to the sky, still unfinished, but ready to fight. Ready like they were. Inside the frame, Elias built a fire. With birch bark he kept bundled in oilskin. The flames caught quick and bright, throwing heat across the dirt floor. Mave dropped beside it, pulling her blanket tight around her shoulders. Her scar glowed in the firelight, the raised line catching shadow. Elias sat across from her, one knee bent, hands steady even though the wind howled outside. "You shake when you're cold," he said quietly, "but not when you're scared." She looked at him through the fire. "I'm not scared." He held her gaze. "I know." The storm screamed at the walls, but inside the small circle of fire, the world felt still. Mave reached into her bag and pulled out her only book, the one that had survived the fire years ago. The pages were singed at the corners, but the words were intact. "You read?" Elias asked. "Learned young, my mother taught me." "What is it?" Quote, "The Odyssey." He raised a brow. Classic choice. "Want me to read?" she asked. Elias didn't say yes, but he didn't look away. That was all the answer she needed. Her voice filled the cabin, soft but steady. She read about storms and shipwrecks, about warriors and homecomings, about a woman waiting and weaving a story across years. Elias listened, like each word eased a part of him that had gone tight from silence. His shoulders softened, his breath slowed. He looked younger somehow, or maybe just less alone. When she closed the book, the storm was still raging, but inside the fire circle, something had shifted. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. I belong here, she said. Maybe not in town, maybe not to anyone, but the mountain, it doesn't lie to me. Elias nodded slowly. Town ain't much better. You still go into it. I have business, he said, not a home. Mave watched him carefully. For the first time, she wondered if Elias carried ghosts too. Not like hers, burned scars and bruised memories, but quieter ones. The kind that lived deep in bone. You lost someone, she said. He didn't flinch, didn't pretend. My wife, he said, long time ago. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. Truth is, we weren't meant for each other. She liked crowds, lights, people. I liked quiet. She died, bringing our baby into the world, and my first feeling was relief, not grief. Mave didn't look away. That doesn't make you a monster. Feels like it sometimes. Quote, we all carry things that feel heavier than they should, she said. Doesn't mean they win. Elias stared into the fire. Maybe not. A branch snapped outside, loud, too loud. Elias was on his feet in an instant, moving to the edge of the wall. Mave grabbed her rifle and stepped into the cold. Snow blew sideways, but footprints, fresh ones, circled the cabin. Someone had been there, close enough to watch. Elias scanned the trees. Who else knows you're here? A few folk, Mave said, jaw tight, but none who'd want trouble. You sure? Quote, she swallowed. No. They watched the dark for a long time, not speaking. The storm pressed around them, but a different kind of threat hung in the cold. Inside, the fire crackled low. You should sleep, Elias said. So should you. I will, after. Mave sat back down, staring at the flames. I'm used to being hunted, she whispered. Elias turned. Not anymore. She didn't look at him, but her breath shook just a little at the edges. Not fear, something else. Before dawn, the storm eased. Mave stepped outside, boots crunching in the snow. She didn't expect him to still be awake. But he was, sitting on a stump, knife in hand, carving something. When she got close, he held it out. A small piece of bark. One word carved into it. Tough. Mave didn't smile, but something warm moved in her chest. You watching me? She asked quietly. I'm watching the woods. Same difference. He looked at her fully now. Not just her face, her stance, her fight, her hunger to live. You build strong, he said. Most folks break when the world burns them. I did break. Maybe, he said, but you didn't stay broken. She stared at him for a long moment, long enough to feel the fire between them shift. Then she whispered the thing she'd carried like a curse. I'm not pretty. Elias stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath warm in the cold air. That's fine, he said. I need honest, not fancy. The words landed inside her like a match against dry wood. Something lit, something new, something she didn't know she still had. The sky over the ridge turned pale gold as the last of the storm clouds drifted away. Mave stepped out of the cabin, her boots crunching through fresh snow. Her breath rose in the cold morning air as she stared toward the tree line where those strange footprints had circled them the night before. Something out there had watched them. Something familiar. Something she wasn't ready to name. Elias joined her, tightening his coat. His eyes scanned the woods with the steady focus of a man who'd lived through too many threats to ignore a new one. You think he'll come back? He asked. Mave wrapped her arms around herself. People like him don't just leave. They come back when they think you're weak. You're not weak. She looked down. I used to be. Not anymore. For a moment the cold felt softer. The day stretched long and quiet as they worked on the roof frame. They moved in rhythm, wood to beam, roof to nail, breath to breath. Elias steadied the boards while Mave hammered, her scar catching the sun like a pale ribbon. They barely spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence had become something warm, something easy. By afternoon, the cabin stood stronger than ever, the walls firm, the roof taking shape. Mave stepped down from a beam and brushed snow off her hands. "Junior's due soon," she said, bringing sassafras root. "Good woman," Elias replied. "No better one in the valley." When Junior arrived, her mule snorted at the cold, and her sharp eyes swept the clearing like she was looking for trouble. "You sleeping at night?" Junior asked Mave as she handed over a basket. "Some." "Storm wake the ghosts?" "Some." Junior's gaze drifted to Elias. "You giving her peace or starting more storms?" He didn't blink, trying to do right. "Good," Junior said. "She's got enough scars." They spent the rest of the afternoon around the fire pit, drinking coffee and talking softly. Mave listened as Junior told stories about the valley. Stories about men who weren't kind and women who survived anyway. By dusk, Junior rode away, promising to bring herbs next week. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, Mave cleared her throat. "I haven't shown you something," she said. Elias raised a brow. "What?" She walked inside and returned holding a small wooden box. She opened it slowly. Inside were 2 copper bands. Handmade. Simple, but crafted with care. "I make things when my hands won't rest," she said. "Made these months ago. Didn't know why then." Elias swallowed. "You want?" "No," she said softly. "Not yet, but someday." His eyes softened in a way she had never seen. "Someday," he repeated. They cooked supper together. Beans, cornbread, smoked bacon. Then they sat near the fire, reading again from her book. When she read the part about travelers who'd survived storms that should have killed them, Elias watched her with something like awe. Later that night, she fell asleep in her chair, book still open in her lap. Elias rose silently, draped a blanket around her shoulders and banked the fire. He didn't wake her. He didn't try to carry her to the bedroll. He simply made sure she stayed warm. Morning brought a strange feeling, something between peace and warning. The air felt too still, the wind too quiet. Mave stepped onto the porch and froze. A wagon was rolling up the trail. 3 women rode in it, Ruth, Clarabelle, and Clara. The same women who once whispered about her behind church walls. They stopped at the steps. "We came to help," Ruth said firmly. Mave crossed her arms. "Why?" "Because we were wrong," Ruth said. "And you built something up here. We want to be part of it." Mave hesitated, heart thudding. Trust didn't come easy. It never had. But when she saw Clara holding a basket of seedlings and Clarabelle carrying bolts of cloth, something inside her softened. "You're not here to judge?" Mave asked quietly. "No," Ruth said. "We're here to build." Mave stepped aside. "Then help." They worked all day, fixing shelves, planting seedlings, sanding the porch, patching blankets. The cabin buzzed with life in a way it never had before. Women who once whispered now laughed. Hands that once pointed now worked. And Mave stood in the middle of it, stronger than she had ever been. By evening, the wagon rolled away, leaving behind a warm porch, a tidy garden, and a handkerchief Clara had stitched just for her. "For your wedding someday," the girl had whispered shyly. Mave held it long after the women were gone, fingers brushing the soft blue thread. That night, she sat across from Elias at the table, firelight flickering on their faces. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so," she whispered. He reached out, his hand warm on hers. "You stood tall today," he said. "Didn't let them make you small." "I had help," she said. "Not the kind I gave," he replied. "The kind you earned." Mave looked at him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "I'm ready," she whispered. Elias didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. He took her hand, steady and sure. "You sure?" quote. "I am." She slid one of the copper bands into his palm. He slipped the other onto her finger. No vows, no crowd, just truth. Then he kissed her. Soft, terrified, honest, perfect. They stood under the cottonwood tree as the sun dipped behind the ridge, and the mountain seemed to breathe around them. For the first time in her life, Mave Callahan felt like she belonged. Not because she was wanted, because she was true. And when Elias pulled her into his arms, she whispered the words she never thought she'd say. "Maybe I don't need fancy." He smiled against her hair. "No," he said, "you need real." And together they walked into the cabin they built from nothing but grit and hope, leaving the cold wind outside where it belonged.